Good afternoon. I'm Henry Luttikhuizen. I'm a member of the Scribblers, an infamous band of ne'er-do-wells that tend to write together and read together and drink beer together on Thursday afternoons. And we would often do this, with our good dear friend, Bob. So first of all, thanks for joining us and celebrating his life. A couple of things I want to point out. First of all, on the little table here, you'll find numerous publications by Bob. Take a peek. And also there's a nice little painting that's owned by Grand Valley that was completed by Bob's friend, Jack Smith. So I want to give you an opportunity to look at that as well. In terms of Bob's life, of course, he was born on the 23rd of April, 1947, died last year on the 9th of December at the age of 78. He was preceded in death by his wife, Deb, but he survived by his son, Colin, who's here, and his stepson, Sean, who's here, and his sister, Nancy, who's here. So welcome to all of you. It's great to see him. Now, in terms of Bob, of course, Bob was a poet and a house painter. He was a man of few words, but paradoxically many in terms of his publications. He was erudite, always reading something, always writing, and yet he was down to earth. He was kind of a true Mensch, as you would say in German, right? And he was just the best of friends. As an art historian, I was always amazed at the way he could conjoin the visual and the verbal. And he would often say this phrase, "See what I mean?" Which kind of points to that. He loved to tell stories, but he was somewhat introverted. Sitting in here listening to us this afternoon would have made him feel like a nervous wreck, which is another line that he would use quite frequently. So in light of that, I've asked speakers to make their comments rather brief today. We've got a little bit more than a dozen, so be prepared, okay, but no long sermons. And so what I'm going to do is call people up just one at a time, and we'll reflect on Bob, okay? So thank you. So first, I want to bring in John Otterbacher. So John?
Yeah, try to get me out of the way early, because I talk way too much. In this instance, I'd just like to read correspondence from one of Bob's oldest and dearest friends, Dan Gerber, who is also a poet and kind of a center of the wheel for many of us. He introduced me to Bob, first of all, back in the 70s. Hank also about the same time. And he loved Bob a lot. I'm going to start with a brief paragraph from Bob, an email that he sent to Dan. "I'm sorry, Dan, I haven't been in touch. My dad died a couple of weeks ago. He had been sick with cancer all summer. It's an odd sadness. I find myself staring into space for long stretches. It will be a while, I think, before I can write about my dad. An odd sadness." This is Dan, his father's death, although feeling like fiction. Bob's poems are the world we overhear when we give ourselves the time and attention to listen. And his life was not only in his poems, it was his poems. He had some cover stories to satisfy a world that too often views an artist, especially a poet, as an idler because they never see us doing anything. Bob taught college for a stretch and then moved on to painting houses, giving him the kind of quiet through which a poem might arrive. It's hard for me to think of Bob without paint on his hands, paint spatters in his hair and his ears. We've all seen some of that. I have been reading his poems and feel as if I could call him right now, and several times I've caught myself with a phone in my hand. And then this sadness found its way into a poem. An odd sadness, you wrote, of your father's death, staring into empty places. And I wonder if that's the sadness I feel now in your absence, as if you had stepped out of a room or I had, and might find you in the kitchen, or maybe just down the hall, like a bruise on the air. Like a fading photograph you can touch while it goes on fading. Like the overheard voices in your poems coming up in our throats. The odd sadness becoming our own. And these guys, these boys loved each other, Dan and Bob. And though I suspect most of you know, Bob was loved by a whole lot of people. I'm looking at you, Sean. I'm looking at Colin. I'm looking at Nancy. And there was just a whole lot of people who loved your dad. Before I yield the floor, I'd like to acknowledge that one of those very special people is sitting in the room today. I don't want to embarrass you, Chris, but Chris Hayes, my pal over there, who without, exactly. A lot of us deal with precious words to express our love. Chris walked Bob through these last 4 difficult years. More than assistant, a companion, and a friend. I'm a little light on sweet words for love, but I'm sitting next to a guy who knows all about it and for which I and many people in this room feel gratitude. Thank you, Chris.
It's humbling to see such a gathering of friends of Bob's, and we had many other friends such as Dan who weren't able to join us today. One of them is someone who many of us know, Jack Ridl, over in now Douglas, but a long time at Hope College. And I hadn't realized until Jack and I were corresponding about Bob that he had probably known Bob longer than many of us who think of ourselves as old friends. And Jack's wife Julie is in ill health, and they weren't able to join us today. So Jack sent along a message as well, and he asked that we read this. And he said, "It's 1971. I had recently moved here from Pittsburgh. I don't think I have ever been so scared. Suddenly I was no longer a poet. This new area had more intelligent, distinguished poets than the woods had deer. I knew for sure they would welcome me, but no way did I imagine they would appreciate my sentimental poems about my mother's Halloween costume or planting impatiens in early April. One day I got a call from the poet Bob VanderMolen inviting me to a session where local poet friends gathered to critique their work. I had no way to say no. "Pick you up at 6:30, said Bob. For 2 days I rambled through my poems trying to pick 3 to lug along. They were all the same, personal, narrative, easy line breaks, attentive to what a reader already knew. Bob picked me up. He was dappled in paint. I said nothing. He asked about Pittsburgh. I kept imagining his poems, how I had never seen anything much like them, wondering how he created them. A conversation began. The drive evolved into comfort. He was a thoughtful, nice guy. Being from a working class background, I at least belonged to in his go-to-work car." Skip ahead. "I don't think I have ever felt someone who felt at home anywhere but Pittsburgh. I don't think I have ever felt I was someone who felt at home anywhere but Pittsburgh. But Bob enabled me to settle in comfortably, admiring the exceptional number of poets who are or should be acknowledged as superb throughout the country. And they have been kind to my heart. My gratitude to Bob covers the sky. A tear just fell." And I'd like to just read, a lot of us have poems of Bob's that have stuck with us, and I'm just going to grab one of these books over here. and just, Bob was a native of the west side of Grand Rapids. And I think the west side is important, but he also was embodied many of our homes as well. And he's got a poem called In the City Park. The sky gray as the sidewalks and monuments, the YMCA converted into exclusive condos. I pause on a funeral sort of day, a bit of ice remaining in grasses, envisioning a pit without a bottom, bodies tumbling like ants, something from a dream while I was ill. I'm the only one here. My trench coat is long and black. I sit on the ends of it, a detective without a license, much less a weapon. Even the bars are closed. It must be a holiday or the end of the world, and I'm the only one who doesn't know, which would be odd. Time is tricky. Grandmother had complained near the end. Even the pigeons have fled. And this one stuck with me because, as John mentioned, I met Bob through our friend Dan Gerber. But before I met him, Dan had given me some of his books that he had published of Bob's. And I saw a picture of Bob, and I recognized him once when I was driving down Monroe Avenue in front of the old Court of Justice, now where DeVos Hall is. And I saw this gaunt figure striding along in a long black trench coat. And that image has always stuck with me. And he was our special friend and poet. And he would be the first person to say, "What are you guys doing today?" But I'd like to think also that we share a love that he inspired in all of us.
When I think of Bob, I think of one of three things. He's at Lincoln Lake on the deck, he's up a ladder, or he's at the cottage bar drinking a beer. So I picked a poem called Lincoln Lake. In March, the ice, as we stood there, knifing away from shore, was a plate a mile long, half a foot thick. In August, you put down your chicken, wiped your hands on a paper napkin, seated at a lawn table I'd painted red. Two swans beat through the air between the willows and you. Thank you.
Bob was the first poet I met when I came to Grand Rapids, to be with Patricia Clark, who was also a poet, of course. And soon we developed a simpatico, and he introduced me to some of his friends that would be your friends as well. And he really got the idea of fraternity, I think. It was important to him. Brotherhood, philos, as the Greeks would say, brotherly love. And one of the places he took me to early on was with your group at the cottage bar, which was always an important place for Bob. And I remember him being in there with paint on his hands, like you had mentioned, and it was very nice to meet his friends and to be connected. And so Dan, where's Dan? Cottage Bar. Your place is mentioned in here, Dan, and this was from his poem, Warm Day in March. Who could have guessed that those days would be the days we talk about, the woman said. I was 8 inches from her window, noticing her hands were paper-like. Her friends, I couldn't determine. A soft tune was playing. The light changed and they accelerated in their Jaguar southbound division, followed by a short convoy of municipal trucks, diesel fumes seeking every orifice, until I continued strolling east. The abandoned Art Deco building where I think the Chamber of Commerce once huddled under cigarette smoke, or was it the Association of Furniture Manufacturers, heading to meet Hank and Larry. Sun blinking on brick and asphalt, behind the used and rare bookstore where rappers scuttled back and forth below an aging communist symbol spray painted on a parking lot post in the 1970s, reddish on off-white. What youngish students at the community college might suspect without much thought is a cattle brand or a logo for vodka, maybe a warning for unprotected sex. Clouds rapidly expanding overhead, and so that the top of the building acquires an induced movement. Though I couldn't seem to get rid of the regret I woke to, a splint of light on the suet feeder, faint stir in the trees, that it had been a mistake to have argued with my father all those years over religion and politics. Issues change, but fundamentals remain the same. Nothing like he witnessed, not like he had witnessed the fall of Rome, not something I cared to dwell on either. Passing my childhood doctor's office and crossing the lane to the cottage bar.
I feel honored to be here after such important people. But this morning I went through his book, Along the River, and one poem kept calling out to me. It's short but perfect. It's called The Boy. Nut trees line the feeble bank, marshes cushion the valley. A boy fishes where someone a night before drank wine and clubbed a large blue racer stuffed in a burnt stump. It moves. Catfish minnows by the thousands munch through shallow water leaves. In its flaunting romaunt, the swan bends upriver. Thanks.
We get to some of the places where Bob could be found. The cottage bar, yes. I never saw him painting. I certainly saw him painted many occasions with paint. Also Lincoln Lake, up many times up there. That was a beautiful place to go, and great times we had there. Let me add one more to the list, and that's the Tip a Few Tavern in Grand Haven. Often Bob would come over, and I would come for my job, and we'd have lunch, and sometimes Hank was there, sometimes John was there, sometimes Foley was there, and Larry. What's Larry's last name? Ten Harmsel, exactly. Larry was there. And we just had great times. Those were wonderful times together. I'm going to read the poem July, which is from Peaches, a collection of Robert's work that came out in 1998, I believe, from Sky Books, which is a small publisher in Muskegon. July. I was Sigmund Freud, and I witnessed the train wreck caused by the saboteurs. It was a wooded area pierced by an avenue of meadow where the train lay smoking. I helped with the rescue of those we found dying, placing them on tarps, listening to their sounds. An investigator asked if I was Jewish. I said I was a student. I woke thinking about being a student and what I once dreamed about violence. In our air-conditioned room, I peered at my sleeping wife. There was no moon, no gin, no Kate Smith records, no cars sailing up Egypt Valley Road in the dead of night. Hills and valleys, riffles and dells of solitude. The puncture where the bullet entered my body. This lake I entered, where I lay in the shallows, thinking of my grandfather, finally. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Bette Van Dinther, and I'm a cottage bar groupie, I suppose. And I would say Bob often said there were two things that he loved about painting, and one was that, as he would often say, he would let the brush do the thinking so that his mind was free to think about poetry and writing. And you've all experienced that, I know. The other thing he would say is that he would meet interesting people when he was painting, and sometimes they would become friends of his. And I claim to be one of those, because I met Bob when he painted our house in 2011. And as you know, when he painted houses, he took long breaks, right? There's coffee and cigarettes in my garage, and I would sit there with him finally, and we got chatting and became friends over that. Took many weeks to paint my house, which was wonderful. One time, he invited me to join the group at the cottage bar, and the first time he had invited me, I didn't accept the invitation because I thought I would be intruding on something. But then the following day after that, he came back and chided me for not going, so I went and met many of you wonderful people there. Again, though, I didn't go after that one time because, again, I thought I was intruding on somebody's group. But again, I was chided. Why didn't you come back? And so I took his invitation to heart, and I've been going there ever since. Recently, I've had the privilege of helping get Bob's papers, his professional papers, in order so that we can eventually get them to the archives at Michigan State. And what a privilege to read through and go through. A privilege and a lot of work to read through and go through so many papers, so many copies over and over, writing and rewriting things. It's amazing what the man did. I also learned just something that I had not internalized before. And so instead of reading a poem, though, I'm going to read something he wrote to me that I think names what it is that I realized about Bob going through his papers. That is that Bob was one of the most content, happy, satisfied people with his life that I think I have ever had the privilege of knowing. I hadn't internalized that, but here's something he wrote to me in 2016 when I asked him something about being a poet. Like, why are you a poet? I asked that question, and here's his answer. The basic answer to number one is that I need to. On the other hand, I do remember that when I first learned to read, I was so astonished to be able to enter different worlds that it seemed like a worthwhile thing to do. That is, write things other people might enjoy, to give satisfaction in that way. I used to write stories in elementary school, which weren't, of course, very good. I didn't really know much. But it was always my idea to write stories or novels. I finally shifted into poetry when I was around 15. It took less time, or so I thought. I was involved with sports, girlfriends, student council, etc. I could write poems sitting in the back of class or in my room at home or on the bus. Can you imagine this kid on the bus writing poems? Anyway, a habit started that never went away, so that eventually I didn't feel well if I wasn't writing. And considering how much time I spent rewriting pieces, I really wasn't saving time at all. I did write some novels later. In my 20s and 30s, they weren't very successful. Plots were my weakness. Short stories, too, some were published, but it seemed to me that I wasn't enjoying writing prose as much as poetry. Somewhere along the line, I realized I could write poetry that was fiction. Poetry is generally thought to be nonfiction. I recall a good friend of mine, a writing friend, saying, "You can't say my wife and I drove to Tennessee if you've never been married. You have to be honest in poetry," the friend said. "Bullshit," I said. The only thing you have to be honest about is not faking emotion. I thought that was very clever of me. In short, I combined fiction and poetry, which has always given me a wider range. I had no intention of being a one-book wonder. And then he talks about imagism and the style of poetry he chose. Since I've gone through his things, I could talk to you for 2 hours about Bob. I could do lessons and everything, but I'll just read one more short thing. This is something he wrote to a friend of his when the friend was depressed and in a bad mood, and I think he was trying to cheer her up. This is what he said. My writing has always been a rudder for me. No matter how bad things could get sometimes, it gave me something to work with, transform something into something else, eyes getting opened a bit wider. I mean, really, life's full of crap if you want to look at it that way, or you can surround yourself with good books, good friends, with curiosity, some physical exercise. I even enjoy the nights I don't sleep well. Get up, fix a drink, make a fire, sit in the dead of night in a dark house, write essays in my head. I even make up speeches to give for some major prize or other. And even if I've never been successful as a writer, it has been so much fun doing it. There are days I can hardly wait to sit at my desk. I recall adults telling me when I was a kid that I daydreamed too much, that it was mentally unhealthy. What a bunch of morons. Love, Bob. And I'm not going to read a poem now because I've taken enough of your time, but it is the case. I wanted to tell you that I think on the table straight across there are copies of a few poems that Bob wrote. One of them is called Pears, which is my favorite, about Grand Rapids. The other is Bridge Street, which is about his father and especially his great-grandfather. And it's just a perfect poem about his great-grandfather. And then besides that, as you came in the door, there's an easel with a poem on it that we're quite sure now is also about Bob's great-grandfather. So take copies of the poems, enjoy the one on the easel, and thanks for listening.
Hello. Hank, thanks so much for including me. Good to see everyone here. My name is Linda Nemec Foster. For those who don't know me, I'm a poet, also a poetry colleague of Bob's, and I was the first poet laureate of Grand Rapids, and in that job, I organized a lot of poetry events. Some of them include Bob, in the program. And before I go on, no poetry, I'm just going to tell you a story, a Bob story. And first of all, it begins with a jacket I'm wearing. I was wearing this jacket at a poetry event some time ago, and Bob came to me with a glass of red wine and gave me a big hug. And guess what happened? But now look at this. Do you see it? Do you see anything but the jacket? So when that happened, I said, "Oh, Bob," he says, "Don't worry, Linda, it'll wash off." And he was right, washed off. So here's my story about Lincoln Lake. And a lot of you remember those wonderful summers. Usually in July or August, we would go. Nancy was there, her husband, the two sons when they were younger, Gordon and Chris, Larry, and Hank, and it was just a wonderful, wonderful time. Miriam and Ron, Vicki and Duncan, Patricia and Stan. It was great, great memories. And this is one memory about one of those parties. And we were by the lake, by the little dock, and it was very, very hot, and everyone went back to the house. We always started outside, and then everyone went back to the house. And there was, beer and wine and drinks and food. We all had to bring a dish. And Miriam and I just wanted to sit and talk on the deck by the water. And so it was just the two of us alone. There was no moon. It was dark. Not a lot of lights down there. All the lights were in the house. And Bob would always say, "Oh, bring a swimsuit." No one really, swam as far as I can remember. But it was just so hot. I looked at Miriam. Miriam looked at me and said, "Let's go in the water." And I said, "I didn't bring a suit." And Miriam said, "Neither did I." I said, "Well, let's do it. Let's take off all our clothes and go in the water." So we did, unbeknownst to everyone else at the party, because they were up, in the cottage. So we made sure we had the towels, because Bob could provide towels for you if you went swimming. So we made sure we brought the towels, and we went in, and I remember the water was very, very warm, and just around shoulder length, which was great because it, covered stuff. And we did not submerge because, hey, we had our hair done, our makeup on. We just, bobbed around. And I just remember we were there for about 15 minutes. No one came down. No one knew what was happening in Lincoln Lake but me and Miriam. And we were just having a good time bopping around. And we finally got out after about 10 or 15 minutes, went back to the house, the cottage, and I did tell my husband, and I guess that's what we did. He's the only one who knew in that group. But Bob came up to me and said, "Where were you? You and Miriam were gone for a long time." And I told him what we did. And he said, "What? What? Say that again." And I did. And he said, "Well, why don't we go back down again?" And I said, "One and done. One and done." Almost like, I know you wanted a beer, so you booze, you lose. You snooze, you lose. And just the look on his face was precious. It was as if, the New Yorker had rejected a poem, but worse. I mean, it was like, just this sense of kind of shock. Me and Miriam, the minister's wife, minister's daughter, and there we were, alone, naked in his lake. And he said, "And I wasn't there." I said, "Oh, you kind of were." So anyway, that's my Bob story. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. My name's Christine Stephens-Krieger. I'm the current Grand Rapids Poet Laureate. And it's my honor to be here with you all today and see all these wonderful, friendly faces. I knew Bob a little bit. He was very generous with his time and skills and talent. Every time I asked him to do something, he was there and totally volunteered and was very willing to help. Just a great individual. I think that he was really practical and down to earth and humble for somebody who was so talented. And I love that he painted houses. I love that about him. So I'm just going to read a short poem from Water. It's the title poem. This is Water. The wrong answer to the wrong question opens across that Magritte mystery of lawn into trees when a sawed-off shotgun appeared in the hand of a man who once worked in the sheriff's department. A miscalculation, women's faces in the window, feeling soft earth, water trickling from a shadow. I hadn't considered this in years. Musky with attention, the young couple across the road, carafe of orange liqueur, appear at the door, chumming for gossip, for dreams. Pink complexion of water, ripples from tide boats, a leaf fluttering loose, before the dogs wake and clatter down the aged wooden steps. Pretty soon it is noon, and you've done nothing. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Otto Selles. I'm honored to be here. I'd like to thank Hank for the invitation and Henry for putting this together. Bob was a dry person, but he was also kind and hospitable. I came to Grand Rapids from Hamilton, Ontario to teach at Calvin, and I didn't know many people here. And when I met him, he took me as I was then, and I can't remember exactly when we met. I was getting involved in creative writing. It was probably at Aquinas at an event, and I talked to him afterwards, and I'm recreating the dialogue, so give me this license. Because I said to him, "Oh, so you're a poet?" And always the poets are wondering, what do you do? What do you do to make a living? What do you do? And he said, "Oh, I'm a painter." And I hope I said, "What medium?" And I imagine he said, "Houses." And his model blew me away because most of the poets I knew were English profs. Mm-hmm. And I'm a French prof, and I found that intimidating. You had to be an English prof to be a poet. And here was someone who was a painter and a poet, and as people have said, very erudite. knowledgeable about everything. And it struck me over my career, the painter poet, the creator, of the thing made, the poem. And I think it's a marvelous model. I'm going to jump back. Okay, I'm going to take the liberty of reading an email, and this is from 2003. So I think the statute of limitations is gone, and I'll read a short poem after this. We were corresponding, I think, about a poem he had written. I think I had gave some comments. And he says, Otto, sitting here with a bad hangover this AM. Too many dinners and parties this week. Tuesday and Wednesday night drinking with Harrison until the bar closed. Last night with Gerber. Another week of this and I'd probably be dead. Well, I'm very glad he had many more years. But I come here with a great regret. I regret that I didn't keep up my contact with him. And I know it was last fall I contacted Henry. I had an event. I was going to invite him. I didn't realize he was sick. So I come here with a bit of shame because he was kind. He was hospitable. So I'm going to read a short poem here, which I think is from his 2024 collection. And it is melancholic. I think it has a real sense of memory, of looking back. On the outskirts. I don't know what I'm going to find. The sky is chipped again. The women have grown older somehow. A memory of linen and flesh. The church dark during the long prayer. And she is reaching for me. I went to church a lot then. Acorns on the top step, the woods waving towards the sky. I'm in my double-breasted suit, my setter at my side. I'm in my white uniform for cleaning swimming pools. I'm in my oil-stained trousers, snow on my cap. In the distance, a train rumbles over a trestle into orchards. There are orioles at the oriole feeder, fat squirrels staring down from oaks. It's beautiful. And there's no period at the end of this poem. It just ends. So, yeah, thank you. Again, kind, hospitable, and may we all be that way. Thank you.
I'm Foley Schuler. It's great to see all of these people here who also loved Bob. My first encounters with him were when I was a precocious young poetry student at Hope College and a protege of Jack Ridl, referenced by Hank a little while ago. And as the editor of the student literary magazine at Hope, I was also part of organizing the poetry readings that now bear Jack Ridl's name, the series at Hope, which was then welcoming a who's who of the greatest poets in the literary world to the Hope campus. But better than all of that were the parties out at the house afterward. That's where the real education happened. And Jack would even have a video that he made because they would stay out at the house. And the title of the video was "They're Just Like Us." It was the poets having breakfast the next morning. But there at the house after the readings, I encountered these two guys, Bob VanderMolen and Hank Meijer, who were often there in tandem. And once again, it was the paint on the hands, caked on the hands of this tall gentleman that intrigued me. And he would have this cap on that I just loved that cap, that like Greek sailor's cap. And got to know him at those afterglows and find out that he was this extraordinary poet that lived in our midst. And during that time, as the precocious young poetry student, I helped found a literary journal here in the area that flourished for 5 years or so, and that published a number of people in this room who were very kind and gracious to send us amazing work, including Bob VanderMolen. and just to receive work from this extraordinary poet, and then to publish a book of his, which was that book Peaches that Greg Rappleye read from. We also published an early book of Greg's. Both of them sent us some of our best poems. I could go on, Linda and a number of others here in this room, but it was just such a thrill as this young up-and-coming poet to be welcomed into this community of poems. And Bob was such a big part of that. And he always treated me like an equal from when I was 21 on up. And my life took various forks in the paths into radio and broadcasting, and he followed me right on up through that as well. He discovered that he could tune in the radio station where I did the afternoons, classical music on Blue Lake Public Radio, up at his cabin in Baldwin. It was this revelation. He started listening. And I had to remind him, well, we have a Grand Rapids station too that you can hear, but he associated it with those great times up at the cabin. I didn't want to disabuse him of that. And I was delighted to become a part of his fabric of his life in that way. And he got that what I was doing was still poetry, even though it was taking this other form. And one of the great moments in my professional life came when I ran into him after he had discovered me on the radio. And he said, Foley, my gosh, I just have to mention your name to somebody that I know you and my stock goes up. And coming from Bob, that was like one of those like young, you know, when you're young in life and you've crossed that threshold and have arrived. And Bob, to echo Stan's comments, he was just such a bringer together of people. That was as great as his poetry was, and it's great. He was a great bringer together of people and into this fabric. And I just so appreciated that. I was an honorary member of the Cottage Bar gang. I was working afternoons, so anytime I happened to be off, I would instantly email him, you know, and I would make plans to come hang with the group. That was one of my very last emails with him, and he said he wasn't able to make it. He was recovering from one of his health challenges, and that was my last communication with him. But also the Lincoln Lake gatherings and just such cherished events, and the gathering of the minds and of the poets. I'll never forget at Lincoln Lake, I was raised on the music of Marty Robbins, big favorite of my mom's and my dad's. And I remember a group of us, like at Bob's party, like spontaneously, I think Larry Ten Harmsel was leading this charge, broke into this rendition of El Paso in 3-part harmony. It was incredible. And these are the kind of magical moments that would happen at those Lincoln Lake gatherings. And I also have cherished memories of those Tip a Few gatherings on the lakeshore. I live in Muskegon, so he would once a year come to the lakeshore. It was this big event. He would come to Grand Haven, and we would gather at Tip a Few. And it was based on this. He had some great experience there years before. I don't know if he was painting somewhere, but he had this wonderful association with Tip a Few in Grand Rapids. It was Grand Haven, and it was late April every year. It was this ritual. And one of the occasions I had just found in a bookstore, I think it might have been Argo's here in Grand Rapids, one of Bob's earliest books. It might be his first book. It's from 1967 when he was 20. And on the back, he looks like a baby. He's still got the cigarette. And this is about the age I was when I met him. And I wished I met him back then as well. But it has the wonderful title, Blood Ink. And I brought this to him to Tip a Few to surprise him with this, and he inscribed my copy for me. But I'm just going to read a few lines from a poem in this book called Grand Haven. This starts out with just and I just want to say that one of the things I was so floored by when I looked at this is how good he was even back then. Early book, 1967. He's one of those poets that refined his style so exquisitely through the course of decades. It's very much like you're reading what he might have written just recently, but still developing profoundly. So I'll just read a few lines. It starts out with some classic swagger of his.
I'm there and walk bare-chested, the blue breeze sharper and more distinct, the length of the pier, and in late July or August, the gulls spread down the sky and circle and split hawk wings over the red lighthouse. The placed cement blocks from a pyramid disassembled inland somewhere. Behind the creeping buffer hills, deep-voiced as the Coast Guard cutter, resonance of winter. The names and schools recorded by laughing night phantoms, stolen next year or the next. Thank you, Bob.
Hello, my name is Dan Verhil, and I have the honor and pleasure of being the proprietor of the Cottage Bar for 41 years. Which was also the home of the Cottage Bar Scribblers. How many of the Scribblers are here today? Raise your hand. So every Thursday for I don't know how many years, do you know, Hank, how many years you're meeting down there?
Started with Larry and me, and then Bob joined us. When would that have been? Sometime in the 1980s, probably.
Yeah, a long, long time ago. And they'd meet every Thursday afternoon at 3 p.m. What time do we meet here today?
Not a coincidence.
Not at all. And they were an eclectic group of poets and writers, and sometimes they'd ask me to sit in with them, and I listened to them talk about things. I'm not a poet, I'm not a writer, but it was fascinating to hear what they had to say, and they critique each other's works and stuff. Excuse me. And I was just amazed at what they were doing there in the front porch of the Cottage Bar every Thursday afternoon for many, many years, which is where I met Bob. And he'd come, he used to be the first one there. He or Larry were always the first ones there. And one day he was the first one there, and I greeted him in the front porch, and he says, Dan, that portrait heading back towards the kitchen, you need to have T-shirts of those made up and sell them. I said, okay, let's do that. So does anybody remember the portrait? The Cottage Bar? So I did. I had T-shirts made up, and we sold dozens of them. And then he said, Dan, you need to get hats made up with Cottage Bar on it. So I did, and we sold dozens and dozens of hats. And we had a warm relationship with not only Bob, but all the writers, and just a great group of individuals. So if you see anybody walking around with a shirt like this, thank Bob.
I'm a man of even fewer words, but I've really gotten to know him through his poetry. And there's something special that all good poetry has, and that's the presence of the writer. He was very present in his work. And to me, poetry is something that it doesn't matter how many times you read a poem, it's new each time. It's a new conversation, a new feeling, a new piece of magic. This is one of the poems that I picked up out of his book, Ink, that I just liked. I'll try to do it justice. It's called On Tuesday. Spotting a van logging through beaches where you hadn't realized there was a road. Staring from your canoe, water lilies and heron, stumps on the bottom, a murderous quiet, the surface of the lake like skin. Well, she did look a little like Mia Farrow, though taller, seated by her current boyfriend beneath a yellow overhang, the sky dim as old plexiglass. It's tough to remain focused while uneasy. The models appearing underaged in the wrinkled magazines you notice while buying rum in the party store. The men on stools, farmers, seem to have been sitting there for 40 years. The ticking of thermometers when the sun clears out of the mist. Thank you.
My name is Glen Peterson, and I've been a member of the Cottage Bar group since the publication of Thin Ice. There's a lot of contributors to that volume who are here today. My favorite quote from a review of Bob's work came from the New York Times in 2021. They were reviewing his book Skin, and this was what the reviewer said in the New York Times. He described it as a testament to watchfulness. A testament to watchfulness. And that was Bob. He was always paying attention. Didn't always look that way, but he was always paying attention. I was one of the people who got his house painted by Bob, and I recall one time he was always writing poetry. Certainly on every one of those long breaks, he was making notes, but also sometimes when he was actually on the ladder, he'd pull out a pad of paper and he would make a few notes. And I was watching him do that at one time. He was about 16 feet up on a ladder, and he's writing, making notes. The paintbrush slipped off the can, tumbled down to the ground, fell in the dirt. It didn't slow him down. He kept writing his notes. That's what he was doing. He was paying attention to what he was writing. So I just wanted to mention that about this wonderful quality. Somebody might say something about that, well, that's somebody who was not paying attention. But that's exactly what he was doing. He was paying attention. That's who he was. I admire that greatly. Thank you.
My name is Steve Tuit, and I'm a high school English teacher. As such, one of my summer jobs has been painting houses. And so when I was invited to join the Scribblers originally, I immediately connected with Bob. We had stood on ladders, right? You have something in common. I will say, joining the Scribblers, I always feel a little out of my league. I feel like I'm the only person in that group who has not written a book. But Bob was the first person who, after I visited, said, "You're coming back, right?" And I loved that. He was maybe the most unpretentious person I ever met, the most genuine. And yes, that observing, he was always observing you, right? He figured you out quickly. Having joined the Scribblers, I ran across this poem. It's called "At the Pub with the Museum Staff." It's a slightly older poem of his, and I'm only going to read a part of it, but I hear him teasing himself and the other members of the group in this piece. "Oh," she said, nodding towards the far corner booth, "those writers are so obnoxious. I wish they'd find a new place to complain." "Ha," said Hillary, "they wouldn't know a good story if it bit them in the butt." And I'm a little surprised he used the word butt. But that's his word, not mine. "Plus," added Vicki, "there's always the lurking danger one may launch into a speech on human nature." I think Bob grasped human nature so well that he didn't need to pontificate on it. He would just observe what was going on. And I am so grateful to have gotten to know him and so many of you. Thank you.
On behalf of some people who would have loved to have been here and aren't, I'd like to say Reinder Van Til, his wife Doe, and my husband Gordon Olson thought the world of Bob. And many of you read poetry of his. And Glenn did reference Thin Ice, some of his prose work. And I spent last night with Bob reading his entry in Thin Ice and a few of his poems. And he became alive to me again. And I just laughed at times when he referred to the coach. Was there really a coach named Coach Suckup? Yep. Really? Anyway, if you haven't read the entries in Thin Ice, some of you are present in that. All of you should give it a go. And thank you for allowing me to say a few words.
Just a couple of reflections on Bob. so many things that you've said, so call him up in my memory and in my heart, because he's just such a good guy, you know. He was a great poet, but he was also a really good guy. And he so loved his Thursday afternoons with the Scribblers. He so loved the time we spent together, the irreverence, the intelligence, the laughter, maybe having a second beer too in his case. I have a lot of memories, Bob, but one of them that's the clearest is his invitation to meet with him down in Spartan Village in the late 70s. I think it was a Saturday football game down there, and so I was happy to see him. But he wasn't at the address he had given me, which was his sister Nancy's condominium. He was down the street at his sister's best friend's place, Deb. And I won't go into the conversation. I don't remember it all. What I do remember is I had never seen so much light in his eyes, and on meeting Deb, so much light in her eyes. And although he didn't know it then, the love he had for her was undeniable. And to her great credit and his good fortune, she put a floor under him at a time when he could use a floor, because even while he was scribbling away, he went through stages in his life where he was a very wild guy. We talked about it and laughed about it later when he was sick and confined to his home, but he was very proud of the fact that when he went to MSU, he skipped an awful lot of the classes because he didn't find them as interesting as the book he was reading or the poem he was working on. He had a powerful attraction and curiosity about the road, so that even mid-semester on several occasions, he stuck out his thumb and found himself in New York City just to check it out, or Florida, or later San Francisco, Montana. He'd go out there just because he was curious, because he had that little boy curiosity about things, but he always was packing a pencil or a pen and was always storing up grist for his poems, grist that served him well after he was exiled to his house for the last 4 years. Deb's cancer diagnosis was sudden and a surprise, and her descent into death, I believe in 2022, was sudden. And Bob shadowed her decline with his own. He was having more and more difficulty with his lungs. He liked to refer to that or think of it as an infection that would pass, but it mostly didn't pass and got increasingly worse. He had loved his Thursdays with our group as we loved our Thursdays with him. But after Deb's death, with a couple of broken hips in between, he ended up confined to his house, a walker, oxygen tanks, and a comfortable chair. We moved when the Cottage Bar closed over to the Monarch on the west side because that was a bar that Bob really liked, and he thought that if he was going to get out of the house and get down to the bar on Thursday, it would be closer to his house. And we stayed there, and we stayed there, and we waited and waited, as did he, to get that lucky break that would free him up to climb in his Ram truck and drive on down. He never got that well again. We talked pretty regularly. I tried to stop by on the way to the cottage or later the Monarch to spend a little time with him most Thursdays. And although I wasn't thinking about it then, I remember now a line out of Marquez, Gabriel Marquez, something to the effect that nothing so resembles our life as our death. Bob was dying down in those last 4 years, buoyed by Colin and Chris. I don't think he would have got through 2 of those years without you two. Love's not just a word, it's a way of behaving, and the way you took care of him kept him alive, as did his poems. We laughed about it a lot, teasing each other, because we grew up on either side of the river, across from each other. He on the west side, me on the northeast side, and we shared a kind of working class ethic that operated on both sides of the river. It was kind of, if you talk straight, you work hard, and you care about other people. He got it drilled into him by his dad and mom, and on the northeast side, my mom was drilling it into me. And looking back now at his life, he got an A in that small classroom. He got an A in every one of those things. He had a bullshit detector that he first applied to himself, so whatever came out of his mouth was exactly what he was thinking, exactly what he saw. He worked his ass off, and his poems kept him alive in those last long years. I would stop in to see him, and I would ask him, "Hey, how you doing?" And sometimes he answered, sometimes he just looked and shrugged, his growing acceptance that this wasn't an infection and it wasn't going to go away. But then his eyebrows would pop up and his chin would stick out, and he'd say, I was at my desk this morning. I did my time. I did my job. So along with Colin and Chris and the other people who loved him, his poems kept him alive. Because no matter whatever else failed him, he had to get up in the morning and get to that desk and take out those notes he'd been gathering over the years and scribble and throw away and scribble some more. And he wrote real good stuff right to the end. I'm not sure he was sure of that, but he had every reason to be. And that's a big part of what I'll carry with me for a long time. That even though he didn't control what was happening to him, and he was clear-eyed about that, he was also clear that you measure a person by their response to what they don't control. And his response was never to complain, never to whine, to try to live on the bright side of a dark day, and there were a lot of dark days. And to get up in the morning, however he felt, and find that walker and straggle out to his desk and sit down and do his job. It'd be so great to do any job as well as he did his. Enough.
you.